There's a dangerous lie that's been controlling your life for years. And the worst part, you probably call it being a good person. You call it kindness. You call it patience. You call it taking the high road. But what if I told you that the very thing you're proud of is the exact thing keeping you weak? Think about that for a second. How many opportunities have you lost because you didn't speak? How many times have you watched someone cross a line and said nothing? How many nights have you replayed conversations in your head, wishing you had been stronger, sharper, more honest? Here's the uncomfortable truth. The person holding you back isn't your boss. It's not your family. It's not society. It's the version of you that's terrified of becoming who you actually are. And that's exactly what Machiavelli understood better than most people ever will. Contrary to what you've been told, Machiavelli wasn't teaching people how to become evil. He was teaching them how to stop being harmless. Because there comes a point in life when being agreeable stops being a virtue and starts becoming a prison. A prison built from guilt, a prison built from fear, a prison built from the desperate need to be liked. Most people spend their entire lives trapped there, but not everyone. Some people reach a moment where something shifts. They start seeing the game for what it is. They stop asking for permission. They stop explaining themselves endlessly. They stop shrinking so other people can stay comfortable. And that's where the fear begins. Because the moment you start becoming stronger, more direct, more unapologetic, you have to confront a question most people spend their lives avoiding. What if the person I'm afraid of becoming is actually the person I'm meant to be? That's what we're going to uncover in this video. Not through motivation, not through empty positivity, but through the darker psychological truths that Machiavelli understood about power, human nature, and the hidden reasons people stay stuck. Because by the end of this video, you're going to realize something that changes everything. The fear isn't coming from becoming powerful. The fear is coming from knowing that once you do, there's no going back. And deep down, a part of you already knows it's time. Before we begin, I want you to write this affirmation in the comments. I choose myself first. Now let's talk about the first sign that your transformation has already started. Your mind crossed the line long before your actions did. Number 1, your mind already crossed the line. Let me prove it. How many arguments have you won in the shower? How many conversations have you replayed at 2 a.m., finally saying everything you should have said in the moment? The perfect comeback, the perfect boundary, the perfect response. In your head, you're decisive. In reality, you're diplomatic. In your mind, you walk away. In reality, you stay and explain. That's the contradiction nobody talks about. Most men aren't lacking confidence. They're suffering from delayed courage, and that changes everything. Because deep down, you already know what needs to be done. You know who needs to be cut off. You know where you're being disrespected. You know which situation is draining your energy. The problem isn't awareness. The problem is execution. Think about the last time someone crossed a line with you. Maybe it was a friend making a disrespectful joke. Maybe it was a woman testing your boundaries. Maybe it was a boss giving you more responsibility without more respect. You felt it immediately, that flash of anger, that tension in your chest. For 1 second, the real you appeared. Then something happened. You smiled, you laughed it off. You said, "It's fine." And just like that, the moment was gone. Not because you were weak, but because you were negotiating with yourself. That's what most men are doing every day. They aren't fighting the world, they're fighting the version of themselves that still wants approval. Machiavelli understood something uncomfortable about human nature. People imagine power begins when you dominate others. Wrong. Power begins the moment you stop needing permission, the moment you stop asking the room if you're allowed to be who you already are. And that's exactly why you're stuck. Not because you're incapable, because you're trying to keep two identities alive at the same time. One version of you wants peace, the other wants respect. One wants acceptance, the other wants freedom. One wants everyone to like him, the other is willing to be misunderstood. And those two men cannot coexist forever. Eventually, one of them has to die. This is why your mental rehearsals feel so real. Your mind has already chosen. Your imagination has already crossed the border. You've already seen yourself becoming more direct, more dangerous, more disciplined, more indifferent to validation. You've lived that reality 1,000 times inside your head, but every time action is required, you retreat back into familiarity. Because fantasy has no consequences, reality does. The moment you actually become that man, people notice. The friend who benefited from your weakness notices. The woman who controlled you through your need for approval notices. The family members who relied on your compliance notice. And suddenly, the game changes. That's what you're really afraid of. Not becoming powerful, but being seen becoming powerful. Because once people witness the shift, there's no hiding anymore, no pretending, no returning to the old character. The truth is brutal. You don't need another video, you don't need another 6 months of preparation. You already know, you have known for a long time. The distance between the man you are and the man you want to become is not measured in years. It's measured in one decision you've been avoiding. One conversation, one boundary, one refusal, one action. The moment your actions finally catch up with your thoughts, the gap disappears. The rehearsal ends, and reality begins. Number 2, your silence serves someone else. This is one of the hardest truths a man can face. Not because it's complicated, but because once you see it, you can't unsee it. Right now, there are people in your life benefiting from the version of you that stays quiet. Not the strong version, not the dangerous version. The manageable version, the predictable version. The version that thinks twice before speaking. The version that explains instead of demands. The version that asks for permission when he should be making decisions. And here's the disturbing part. Most of them aren't doing it consciously. They're not sitting in a room plotting against you. They don't have to. Human nature takes care of that automatically. People build comfort around your weaknesses. Think about it. The friend who only calls when he needs something. The woman who keeps you close but never fully commits. The family member who dismisses your goals and tells you to be realistic. The boss who keeps giving you more work but somehow never more respect. Different faces, same pattern. Your compliance became useful, and useful things rarely get encouraged to change. Machiavelli understood something most men never notice. Every relationship contains a hidden negotiation of power. Not power in the dramatic sense, but power in the silent sense. Who adapts to whom? Who sacrifices? Who leads? Who follows? Who speaks? Who stays quiet? And for years, you've probably been sending the same message without realizing it. My comfort matters less than yours. The moment that message changes, everything changes. That's when the resistance begins. Not because people hate your growth, but because your growth forces them to reposition themselves. And most people hate adjustment. Watch what happens when a man who always says yes suddenly says no. The room goes silent. People get uncomfortable. Questions appear. What happened to you? Why are you acting different? You've changed. Pay attention to that phrase, you've changed. As if growth were a crime. As if becoming stronger were some kind of betrayal. But let's be brutally honest. Nobody complained when you were sacrificing your needs. Nobody complained when you were overgiving. Nobody complained when you were carrying burdens that weren't yours. The complaints only start when you stop. That's not concern, that's dependency losing access. And this is where most men fail. They mistake resistance for a sign they're doing something wrong. They feel guilt, they feel pressure, they start wondering if they're becoming selfish. So they retreat, they shrink again, they return to the old version, because conflict feels uncomfortable. But Machiavelli would tell you something few people have the courage to say. You're not afraid of change. You're afraid of disappointing people who benefited from your weakness. Read that again, because that's the real battle. Not becoming stronger, but accepting that some people preferred you weaker. Some people loved the access they had to you, the influence they had over you, the control they had over your decisions. And when that disappears, so does their comfort. Good. Let it disappear. Because every time you betray yourself to keep the peace, you're making a trade. Their comfort in exchange for your potential, their approval in exchange for your freedom, their temporary happiness in exchange for your entire future. That's a terrible deal, and deep down, you know it. The version of you waiting on the other side isn't selfish. He simply stopped volunteering for his own disrespect. So if people become uncomfortable when you start valuing yourself, let them be uncomfortable. Their discomfort is not evidence that you're wrong. Sometimes, it's evidence that you're finally doing something right. Number 3, one move changes everything. Most men spend years collecting knowledge they never use. They watch videos about confidence, read books about power, study psychology, discipline, status, and influence. They know every principle, yet their life stays exactly the same. Why? Because understanding power and displaying power are two completely different things. Machiavelli understood something most men never do. Power is not what you know. Power is what people can see. Think about it. You can know your worth all day long. You can repeat affirmations in the mirror. You can tell yourself you're a high-value man. But if you still tolerate disrespect, if you still explain yourself when no explanation is needed, if you still stay where you're not valued, then your actions are exposing a different truth. And reality always listens to actions more than words. This is where most men get trapped, not in weakness, but in preparation. They become addicted to preparing. One more book, one more video, one more month, one more plan, one more strategy. But preparation feels productive because it lets you avoid the only thing that matters, the move. I once heard a story about a man who spent 3 years learning everything about starting a business. 3 years, business books, podcasts, courses, mentors. Then one day another man with almost no knowledge launched a mediocre product and made his first sale. The expert stayed where he was, the beginner moved, and reality rewarded movement. That's a brutal lesson. The world doesn't reward potential. It rewards visible action. The same thing is happening in your life right now. Maybe there's a conversation you've been avoiding, a boundary you've been postponing, a relationship you've already outgrown, a person you've needed to walk away from for months. You already know it. The evidence is there. You've replayed the scenario in your head 100 times. The problem isn't clarity. The problem is commitment. Because the moment you make the move, something terrifying happens. People see it. The old version of you dies publicly. Not privately. The people who knew the agreeable version notice. The people who benefited from your hesitation notice. The people who benefited from your hesitation notice. The people who relied on your compliance notice. And suddenly there is no hiding, no pretending, no retreat. That's why hesitation feels safe. As long as you don't act, you can still tell yourself you're working on it. You can still imagine being powerful without accepting the cost of becoming powerful. But the moment you act, the fantasy disappears, identity becomes real. That's what most men are actually afraid of. Not failure. Exposure. The exposure that comes with becoming who they claim they want to be. Because once you make that first move, you send a message, not to the world, but to yourself. You prove that your actions can no longer be negotiated by fear. And here's the secret nobody talks about: the first move is never comfortable. Your heart races. Your mind creates worst-case scenarios. You start imagining rejection, conflict, consequences. Then you act. And most of the time, the monster was smaller than your imagination made it. That's when the shift happens. You realize the man you were afraid of becoming isn't ruthless, isn't arrogant, isn't dangerous. He's simply a man who stopped asking permission to exist. So let me ask you something. What's the one move you've been avoiding? The phone call? The boundary? The rejection? The decision? Whatever it is, stop studying it. Stop rehearsing it. Stop negotiating with it. Make the move. Because the life you've been imagining begins on the other side of a single action. Number 4, firmness isn't violence. And if you don't understand this, you'll spend your entire life confusing weakness with virtue. This is one of the biggest psychological traps men fall into. They believe that becoming stronger means becoming colder. They believe that setting boundaries means becoming selfish. They believe that saying no makes them a bad person. So they stay agreeable. They stay available. They stay easy to control. And then they wonder why nobody respects them. Let me tell you something most people will never say out loud. The world does not punish weak men because they are cruel. The world punishes weak men because they are convenient. There's a difference. Convenient men get used. Convenient men get used. Convenient men get overlooked. Convenient men become resources in other people's stories instead of becoming the author of their own. And it starts with a lie you've probably been carrying since childhood. The lie that being a good man means making everyone comfortable. Think about how many times you've done it. You wanted to say no. You said yes. You wanted to leave. You stayed. You wanted to speak. You stayed silent. Not because you agreed, because you wanted to avoid tension, because you wanted to avoid being judged, because you wanted people to keep liking you. And here's the brutal reality. Every time you betray your own instincts to protect someone else's comfort, you teach people exactly how to treat you. Read that again. Because that's how power quietly disappears from a man's life. Not through one dramatic moment, through thousands of small acts of self-abandonment. Machiavelli understood something most people completely miss. Control is not controlling other people. Control is controlling yourself, your emotions, your reactions, your need for approval, your fear of rejection. The average man thinks strength means dominating the room. The powerful man knows strength means dominating himself. Look at what happens when someone repeatedly disrespects your boundaries. One man explodes. Another man stays silent and builds resentment. Both are emotional. Both are reactive. Both have surrendered control. The strong man does something different. He addresses it calmly, directly, without anger, without guilt, without negotiation. And that's exactly why people fear him more. Because emotional men are predictable, controlled men are not. Here's another uncomfortable truth. The moment you stop over-explaining yourself, some people will call you cold. The moment you stop chasing validation, some people will call you arrogant. The moment you stop tolerating disrespect, some people will call you difficult. But pay attention. Those labels usually come from people who were benefiting from your lack of boundaries. People rarely complain when you're sacrificing yourself. They complain when you stop. That's not morality. That's access being revoked. And access is one of the most valuable currencies in human relationships. Not everyone deserves unlimited access to your time. Not everyone deserves access to your attention. Not everyone deserves access to your energy. Yet most men hand these things out for free because they're terrified of disappointing people. That's not kindness. That's dependency disguised as virtue. The man who values himself understands scarcity. He understands that attention is finite. Energy is finite. Time is finite. And because they're finite, they must be protected. This is where firmness is born. Not from anger. Not from cruelty. From self-respect. Real strength is not becoming heartless. Real strength is becoming selective. Selective with your energy. Selective with your trust. Selective with your presence. You don't have to become a tyrant. You don't have to become cold. You simply have to stop treating everyone as if they've earned a place in your life, because they haven't. And the moment you understand that, everything changes. You stop living for approval. You stop negotiating your worth. You stop apologizing for having standards. And that's when people begin to feel your strength. Not because you became louder, because you became harder to move. Drop this affirmation in the comments. Strength protects my peace. Number 5. Comfort dies when you rise. Nobody tells men this part. They tell you about success. They tell you about confidence. They tell you about becoming stronger. What they don't tell you is what it costs. Because every transformation comes with a funeral. Not the death of your potential, the death of your old relationships, your old identity, and the comfort that came with both. And that is where most men turn back. Not because they failed, because they got lonely. Let me explain something that took me years to understand. Some people don't love you, they love their position in your life. There's a difference, a massive difference. The friend who always gave advice when you were confused. The woman who felt secure when you constantly chased her validation. The family member who felt superior when you doubted yourself. The moment you stop needing what they were providing, the entire dynamic shifts. Suddenly the warmth changes. The enthusiasm fades. The support becomes quieter, and at first, it feels confusing. Because from your perspective, nothing bad happened. You didn't attack anyone. You didn't betray anyone. You didn't become arrogant. You simply stopped abandoning yourself. But that's exactly what makes people uncomfortable. Because your growth forces everyone around you to face a new version of you, and not everyone benefits from that version. Machiavelli saw this pattern everywhere. The moment a man rises, hidden loyalties are exposed. Not because people become worse, because masks become unnecessary. Power reveals, it doesn't create. And the same thing happens in your own life. You start respecting your time. The people who wasted it disappear. You start valuing your attention. The people who fed on it become frustrated. You start trusting your own judgment. The people who controlled your decisions suddenly lose influence. And influence is addictive. Many people don't miss you, they miss access to you. Read that again. Because that's one of the most expensive lessons a man can learn. Many people don't miss you, they miss the version of you they could control. The version that over-explained. The version that over-explained. The version that constantly proved himself. The version that was always available. The version that tolerated things he should have walked away from years ago. Now here's where it becomes painful. Even when you know a connection was unhealthy, you'll still miss it. You'll miss the routine. You'll miss the familiarity. You'll miss the late-night conversations. You'll miss the late-night conversations. You'll miss the illusion. Not because it was good, because it was familiar. And familiarity is one of the strongest drugs in existence. That's why so many men return to situations that hurt them. Not out of love, out of familiarity. The known pain feels safer than the unknown future. But understand this. Affection that disappears when you develop standards was never affection. It was a contract. A silent contract. I'll give you approval as long as you remain who I need you to be. The moment you break that contract, the approval vanishes. Good, let it vanish. Because approval purchased through self-betrayal is one of the most expensive currencies a man can spend. The truth is brutal. When you become stronger, some people will leave. Some people will become distant. Some people will resent your growth without ever admitting it. And for a while, there will be a gap. A period where the old life is gone but the new one hasn't arrived yet. That gap feels empty, quiet, cold. Many men mistake that stage for failure. It's not failure. It's transition. It's the space where your old identity dies before your new life fully arrives. And on the other side of that loneliness, something remarkable happens. The people who remain respect you more. The people who arrive know the real version of you from the beginning. No performance. No masks. No negotiation. Just truth. And for the first time in your life, you stop being valued for your usefulness and start being valued for who you actually are. Number 6. Silence becomes your filter. This is where most men misunderstand power. They think power is being the loudest man in the room, the sharpest speaker, the man with the perfect comeback, the man who always has the last word. But if you've ever watched truly powerful men closely, you'll notice something strange. They rarely rush to respond. They rarely explain themselves. They rarely defend themselves. And that's not because they can't. It's because they don't need to. The average man lives in reaction mode. Someone criticizes him, he reacts. Someone ignores him, he reacts. Someone challenges him, he reacts. His emotions become a remote control that everyone else gets to hold, and the worst part. He thinks he's in control. He's not. He's being controlled. Machiavelli understood a dangerous truth about human nature. Every reaction is information. Every emotional outburst reveals a weakness. Every defensive explanation reveals insecurity. Every desperate attempt to be understood reveals dependence on approval. People are constantly studying each other, not consciously, instinctively. They're watching what affects you. They're watching what triggers you. They're watching what makes you lose composure. And the moment they find it, they find leverage. Think about the last argument you had, not the argument itself, the moment before it, the exact second someone said something that irritated you. You felt it, didn't you? That surge of emotion, that urge to respond immediately, that need to correct them, to prove them wrong, to defend your position. Most men obey that impulse instantly, But powerful men do something different. They pause. And that pause changes everything. Because in that moment, they ask a question most people never ask. Does this deserve my energy? Not every battle deserves a soldier. Not every opinion deserves a response. Not every insult deserves attention. And this is where your life begins to change. You stop treating every challenge as if it's important. You stop giving equal value to people who have done nothing to earn your respect. You stop handing out your attention like it's free. Because attention is power, and most people are bankrupt because they spend it on nonsense. Look around. Entire lives are being consumed by noise, arguments online, drama between people who don't matter, validation from strangers, endless explanations, endless proving, endless reacting. And while they're busy reacting, someone else is quietly building, quietly growing, quietly advancing. The lion doesn't stop hunting because a crow is making noise. Remember that. One of the biggest shifts you'll ever make as a man is realizing that silence frustrates manipulators more than confrontation. Why? Because manipulators need engagement. They need your reaction, your anger, your attention, your emotional investment. The moment you stop providing those things, they lose access to you. That's why some people become more aggressive when you become calmer. They aren't seeking understanding. They're seeking control. They're testing whether they can still reach your emotions, whether they can still pull your strings, and when they can't, they become uncomfortable. Good. Let them. Because every time you refuse to react impulsively, you strengthen something inside yourself: discipline, control, presence. The qualities that separate men who lead their lives from men who are dragged through them. This doesn't mean becoming emotionless. It means becoming selective about where your energy goes, selective about who receives your attention, selective about which battles deserve your time. Because once silence becomes your filter, something unexpected happens. Life becomes quieter. Not because the world stopped talking, because you finally stopped listening to everything. And that is where real power begins. Not when you control others, when others can no longer control you. Number 7, commitment kills the fear. This is the final piece, the piece most men spend their entire lives avoiding, because everything we've talked about leads here: the boundaries, the silence, the loss of approval, the visible actions, the uncomfortable growth. None of it matters without commitment. And here's why. Fear doesn't live in action. Fear lives in hesitation. Fear lives in the space between knowing and doing, between deciding and acting, between the man you are and the man you keep imagining becoming. That's where anxiety feeds. That's where doubt multiplies. That's where years disappear. Let me ask you something. Have you ever noticed that the hardest part of any decision is before you make it? Not after, before. The man who knows he should leave the relationship suffers more deciding than leaving. The man who knows he should quit the job suffers more deciding than quitting. The man who knows he should speak up suffers more deciding than speaking. Because uncertainty is torture. The mind hates unfinished decisions. That's why you've been exhausted. Not because your life is hard, but because you've been carrying decisions you should have made years ago. Machiavelli understood something most people never realize: indecision is a hidden form of surrender. Every day you refuse to choose, circumstances choose for you. Every day you delay action, someone else gains influence over your future. Every day you remain stuck between two identities. The old identity keeps winning. Think about how many men spend years trapped in this state. They talk about changing, they think about changing, they plan to change, they dream about changing, but they never commit. Why? Because commitment is dangerous. Commitment burns the bridge behind you. Commitment removes excuses. Commitment creates accountability. And suddenly, the fantasy becomes reality. That's what most men are actually afraid of. Not failure, finality. Because as long as the decision remains unmade, they can still tell themselves a story. I'll do it next month. I'm waiting for the right moment. I need a little more time. No. You need a decision. Because the right moment is one of the biggest lies ever sold to men. The right moment never arrives. The right moment is created the second you stop negotiating with yourself. Look back at your life. The biggest changes didn't happen when you felt ready. They happened when you became tired of staying the same. That's the real catalyst. Not confidence, not certainty. Enough pain, enough disappointment, enough self-betrayal, enough excuses, and once that threshold is crossed, something incredible happens. The fear starts dying, not because the risk disappears, because the internal war ends. You stop arguing with yourself. You stop replaying scenarios. You stop imagining 10 different futures. You choose one path and suddenly your energy returns. Your focus returns, your clarity returns. Because a divided man is weak. A committed man is dangerous. Not dangerous to other people, dangerous to the limitations that once controlled him. That's why the strongest men you've ever met seem calm. It's not because life is easier for them. It's because they've already decided. They're no longer wasting energy debating who they're going to be. That debate is over. And now we're here, at the edge. The same edge you've been standing on throughout this entire video. So let me ask you one final question. How much longer are you going to live in the gap? How much longer are you going to keep one foot in the old life and one foot in the new one? Because eventually, that gap becomes your prison. And prisons become comfortable if you stay long enough. The truth is simple. The person you're afraid to become is waiting on the other side of a single decision. Not 10 decisions, one. The moment you make it, fear loses its greatest weapon, uncertainty. The moment you commit, the war inside you ends, and the man you've been chasing finally becomes real. I commit fully now. Read those words again, not tomorrow. Not when you're ready. Not when everyone finally understands you, now. Because the truth is, the man you're afraid of becoming doesn't scare you, because he's dangerous. He scares you because he ends the negotiation. And most men are addicted to negotiating with themselves. One more chance, one more excuse, one more conversation, one more warning, one more month, one more year. Their entire lives become a waiting room. Waiting for certainty, waiting for confidence, waiting for confidence, waiting for a version of reality that never arrives. But the man you're becoming doesn't live there. He doesn't negotiate with what he already knows. He acts. That's the difference. Not intelligence, not talent, not luck, decision. Think about the patterns you've tolerated. The people who kept disappointing you, the situations you knew were wrong. The opportunities you knew you should have taken, the boundaries you knew you should have enforced. Deep down, you always knew. The problem was never a lack of awareness. The problem was never a lack of awareness. The problem was that awareness without action creates suffering. And that's exactly where most men live. In that painful space between seeing the truth and acting on it. Machiavelli understood something brutal about human nature. People don't suffer most from failure. They suffer from self-betrayal. Failure hurts once, but self-betrayal hurts every day. Every day you ignore your instincts. Every day you silence your own judgment. Every day you choose comfort over truth. A small piece of your self-respect disappears. Not all at once, but slowly, quietly, until one day you wake up feeling disconnected from yourself, and you can't even explain why. That's the real cost. Not rejection, not conflict, not criticism, but losing trust in yourself. Because once a man stops trusting himself, everyone else starts influencing him. Their opinions become louder than his instincts. Their approval becomes more important than his mission. Their comfort becomes more valuable than his future. And that's how powerful men become weak. Not through force, but through compromise, the compromise of their own truth. But the version of you waiting on the other side of this decision is different. He's not fearless. He's just done asking fear for advice. He's not emotionless. He's just stopped allowing emotions to make decisions for him. He's not cold. He's simply no longer available for manipulation, and that's what makes him powerful. Not because he controls others, but because others no longer control him. The moment you become that man, something unexpected happens. Life gets simpler. Not easier, but simpler. You stop overthinking every decision. You stop replaying every conversation. You stop chasing people who don't choose you. You stop explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. And you stop shrinking so others can feel taller. And for the first time, your energy starts flowing in one direction instead of 10. That's why this moment matters. Because once you cross this line, there is no going back. The old version of you loses its grip. The people pleaser loses his influence. The approval seeker loses his voice. And the fearful version of you becomes a memory. And that's exactly why the fear feels so intense right now, because you're standing at the edge, not of failure, but of transformation. Deep down, you already know what's waiting on the other side: more respect, more peace, more self-trust, and more freedom. The only thing left is the step. So take it. Become the man you've been avoiding. Become the man you've been rehearsing in your mind for years. Become the man who finally chooses himself. Because one day you'll realize something that changes everything. The person you were afraid to become was the person you were always supposed to be. If this message hit you harder than expected, hit the like button. Subscribe for more conversations most people are too afraid to have. And in the comments, write this: I commit fully now. Because the moment you declare it publicly, the transformation has already begun.